안녕하십니까. 저는 대한간호협회 이사이면서 간호교육 정책위원장직을 맡고 있는 박효정입니다. 오전 심포지움에서도 뵌 분들도 계시지만 다시 한번 인사드리겠습니다. 네. 대한간호협회 간담회 참석을 위해서 귀한 시간을 내어주신 내빈 여러분께 감사드립니다. CCNE의 노리 에스칼러 박사님, 제니퍼 버틀랜드 박사님께서 저희 관심 주제에 대한 내용을 심도 있게 준비해 주셨습니다. 그럼 지금부터 실무 기반 교육 프로그램 인증 고찰 및 간호교육기관 역할을 주제로 간담회를 시작하겠습니다. 잠시만요. 저희가 이사회 때문에 아마 회장님이랑 다른 분들이 못 오시는 것 같은데 저희 혹시 사진 촬영은 안 해도 되죠? 조금 이따가 다음에 저희가 사진 촬영은 나중에 회장님 이하 임원진 분들께서 오시면 하도록 하겠습니다. 그러면 이제 간담회를 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 첫 번째 제니퍼 버틀랜드 박사님께서 실무 기반 CCNE 인증 개요에 대해서 간호사 레지던시랑 펠로우십 프로그램을 주제로 발표하시겠습니다. 혹시 오전에 참석 안 하신 분들 양력을 잠깐 소개해드리면 제니퍼 버틀랜드 박사님께서는 1998년부터 CCNE의 이그제큐티브 디렉터로서 재직하시면서 보건의료 전문직 인증 분야에서 32년 이상 경력을 쌓으셨습니다. 그리고 제니퍼 버틀랜드 박사님의 리더십 아래 CCNE는 지속적인 성장을 이뤘으며 인증 범위가 확대해 왔습니다. CCNE 설립 초기에는 학사, 석사, 학위 프로그램에 한정해서 인증을 시행하였지만 현재는 DMP 프로그램, 포스트 그레주에이트, APRN, 서티피케이트 프로그램까지 인증하고 있습니다. 주제 발표 시간은 40분입니다. 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you, Dr. Park. I'm Dr. Jennifer Butland, CCNE Executive Director from Washington, D.C., and I'd like to thank the Korean Nursing Association for sponsoring us and our strong collaboration with Kabon Accreditation for Korea. On behalf of Dr. Lori Escalera, our board chair, and myself, we'd like to thank all of you for attending this afternoon's roundtable discussion. We think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to partner globally in discussing some of the challenges and opportunities that we have to strengthen nursing education. In preparing for the roundtable discussion this afternoon, we understand that you are interested in learning more about the work CCNE does as a national nursing accreditor in the United States, not only to accredit nursing education programs at the baccalaureate through doctoral level, but also the work that we do in healthcare organizations to ensure quality in nurse residency and fellowship programs in healthcare settings. And so that will be the focus of this session, to familiarize you with CCNE accreditation when it comes to the nurse residency and fellowship program accreditation process. We have three objectives for this afternoon's session on residency and fellowship program accreditation. First, we'll discuss the historical overview of how CCNE got involved in accrediting nurse residency and fellowship programs for accreditation. We'll also examine the types of residency programs and the numbers of entry to practice nurse residency programs and nurse practitioner fellowship and residency programs that are within CCNE's scope of operation. And third, we'll review at a very high level the fellowship and residency standards for accreditation that are used today in the United States. Okay. So in terms of a historical overview, one thing that I would like to share is that CCNE began accrediting programs in 1998. So we are approaching our 30th anniversary as an accreditor in the US. But it wasn't until about 16 years ago that we got involved in the healthcare organization nurse residency accreditation. When we were founded as an organization, we only accredited bachelor's degree programs in nursing and master's degree programs. Subsequent to that, we expanded our scope in higher education institutions to include accreditation of Doctor of Nursing Practice, or DNP programs, as well as postgraduate APRN certificate programs. Today, we are focusing here on the residency side of CCNE's work, and there are many similarities to how we accredit residency programs in terms of how we accredit education programs in universities. But there are also some distinct differences. Let me begin by focusing on why CCNE accredits entry to practice nurse residency programs. These types of programs are a series of learning sessions and experiences that occur continuously over one full year. They must be 12 months in length, or we will not consider them for accreditation. And there also is a collaborative partnership between a healthcare organization and one or more academic nursing programs in order to be eligible for CCNE accreditation, and we believe to have a program that thrives, because that partnership is so important. The entry to practice nurse residency programs serve to foster the process of professional role socialization for the new nurse in the workplace. And this involves the acquisition of knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, norms, and roles associated with the practice of a profession, in this case, nursing. The second type of residency program CCNE accredits is for nurse practitioner fellowships and residency programs. I want to say a word here about the NP fellowships and residencies. You may hear me use the term residency program, but some of the programs we accredit are called fellowship programs. From CCNE's perspective, there is no difference between a residency program and a fellowship program. We use these terms interchangeably. Some healthcare organizations choose to use specific terminology, such as fellowship. At the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, they use the term residency. So this varies across institutions in terms of the language they use. Sometimes residency, sometimes fellowship. It means the same thing to CCNE, and we apply the same accreditation standards, processes, and procedures, regardless of how it is titled or labeled by the healthcare organization. Now, as is the case in nursing, I believe in the United States and every other country around the globe, there are politics involved. And there are some organizations that feel very strongly that nurse practitioner residencies should not be called a fellowship. And other institutions and organizations who feel very strongly that nurse practitioner fellowships should not be called residency programs. And some of the politics is that in the profession of medicine, there are residencies, and those are required experiences that are part of the medical education process. And the organizations who feel that we should call NP residencies fellowships are concerned that it would imply that a nurse practitioner must participate in a fellowship or a residency program in order to function and practice in the role of nurse practitioner. So I want to be very clear that in the United States, nurse practitioners are not required to participate in a fellowship or a residency program. It is an optional program that it goes beyond the nurse practitioner's core educational preparation at the graduate level, okay? So the concern was that if the word residency was used, some people, some employers might feel that it's a requirement, and it is not a requirement. And we stand by that important concept because we believe that master's and clinical doctoral programs do adequately prepare nurse practitioners for the workforce. The reason we are accrediting fellowships and residencies is as an option to further prepare and support nurse practitioners who are new in their workforce career, okay? So with that said, nurse practitioner fellowship or residency programs consist of a series of coordinated learning sessions and other experiences that occur over a 9 to 18-month period and are designed to assist participants as they transition to their first job as a nurse practitioner or to a new specialty area. And a specialty area might be cardiology, oncology, or other area within their defined scope of practice. These programs do not change the scope of practice for which participants were educated and hold certification. Let me give an example. Dr. Escalera is prepared as a pediatric nurse practitioner. If she wanted to become an adult gerontological nurse practitioner, she could not simply enroll in a nurse practitioner fellowship residency program to change her population focus. No. She would need to return to school and complete her graduate education to be prepared for the adult gerontological area of focus. So I want to be very clear that the nurse practitioner fellowship and residency programs are designed to prepare the nurse practitioner in the workplace for their career and their new role, but they are not intended to be a substitute for a rigorous graduate education where they are prepared for their role and population focus, okay? These programs are intended for healthcare provider roles in the organization. Each program is reviewed for CCNE accreditation, must be offered by an accredited healthcare organization in partnership with an accredited academic nursing program. So, for example, in the United States, many of you may have heard of JCO or the Joint Commission, TJC. That organization accredits hospitals. So the hospital or healthcare organization must have accreditation. Also, the partnering academic university must hold institutional accreditation. There needs to be a formal partnership between the two in order for that NP fellowship residency program to be eligible to pursue accreditation by CCNE. Here is a brief overview in terms of the timeline of CCNE's involvement in residency accreditation activities. As I said, it started almost 20 years ago, and until that time, our only focus at CCNE had been the accreditation of nursing education programs in universities. So this was a change. We established a task force on nurse residency program accreditation, which finalized standards for residency program accreditation. About 9 years later, we revised the entry to practice nurse residency program standards, and they went into effect following the national revision process. CCNE has a commitment to review and revise its accreditation standards every 5 years or sooner. Why is that? It's because we really believe in the importance of keeping the national standards for accreditation relevant and current in a rapidly changing healthcare and higher education environment. And that is why we have a commitment to review and consider revisions to the standards every 5 years or sooner. So you'll see that in 2022, we finished revising the entry to practice standards again, and they went into effect after a extensive national review process. And then in the same year, 2022, CCNE began accepting applications for nurse practitioner fellowship and residency accreditation process, and we granted accreditation to the first NP fellowship and residency programs in 2023. CCNE finalized revisions to the entry to practice nurse residency program standards very recently. In April, our Board of Commissioners voted to amend those standards, and those will go into effect January 1st of 2027. Okay. In terms of the scope and affiliation related to our work in the nurse residency and fellowship program area, our scope for entry to practice nurse residency programs, these are the 12-month programs that prepare the new nurse for their professional role in the workplace. These include all entry to practice nurse residency programs in the United States, including those that serve BSN prepared students and those who serve associate degree or ADN prepared students. So students may graduate from a community college program with an ADN, associate degree, or they may graduate from a BSN, a four-year BSN university. And either way, they could enroll in the entry to practice nurse residency program that we accredit. So they have residents coming in with an associate's or a bachelor's, but the entry to practice residency curriculum is the same. The nurse residency programs are in all care settings. It's not just limited to one care setting. And we also accredit separately employee-based nurse residency programs and federally funded traineeships nurse residency programs, and we accredit those separately. Usually, a healthcare organization will not offer both an employee-based and a federally funded traineeship, but it is possible that that happens. The employee-based nurse residency programs hire newly licensed nurses as permanent employees of the healthcare organization, whereas the federally funded traineeship residency programs engage newly licensed nurses for the duration of the residency program without a commitment for continued employment. They are considered trainees, not employees of the organization. Our scope of accreditation for NP fellowship and residency program includes NP fellowships and residencies in the U.S. that assist nurse practitioners as they transition to practice or to a new area of practice specialty like cardiology within the nurse practitioner's current defined scope of practice. The NP Fellowship Residency Program could be offered in any care setting. It must be supported by an academic practice partnership with one or more universities, and the managing entity or hospital or healthcare organization may be either an academic partner or a practice partner. Now, it's almost always the practice partner, like a hospital or healthcare organization. But we have had some inquiries in recent years about whether the academic institution could be the managing or lead entity of an NP residency fellowship program, which just shows that there are some innovative models that are being developed now. If you look at our numbers of affiliated programs today, we accredit entry to practice nurse residency programs, and 52 of those offer the employee-based track. 44 of them are federally funded traineeships. Also, we have 17 entry to practice nurse residency programs that hold applicant status, that are actively pursuing CCNE accreditation for the first time, and they are planning to host an on-site evaluation within a 2-year period. 6 of these are employee-based, and 11 are federally funded traineeships. And secondly, we accredit 39 nurse practitioner fellowship and residency programs, and 11 are in the pipeline to host evaluations as new applicants for initial accreditation. So we are definitely seeing growth in our accreditation program in both areas, entry to practice as well as NP fellowship. Moving on to the accreditation core foundational documents for residency and fellowship programs, you'll find that CCNE publishes separate national standards for the entry to practice residency programs, and those are separate and distinct from those standards we use for nurse practitioner fellowship and residency standards. I've included the links here, and even if you have a paper version, I've included the URL so you can type it in to get there if you would like to explore these documents further. So the two core documents governing the accreditation process are going to be the standards for accreditation and then the procedures for accreditation. The standards for accreditation serve as the criteria. We assess programs using those standards to determine whether they are meeting CCNE's expectations. The procedures for accreditation are all of the policies of CCNE. We call it the ABCs of accreditation. Everything from the requirements for a self-study to hosting the on-site evaluation to the different types of actions that the Board of Commissioners could take. We include all of our program monitoring policies, a policy on filing a complaint, disclosure, conflicts of interest, confidentiality. Those are all examples of policies within the CCNE procedures for accreditation. I thought it might be helpful. KNA and Cabon suggested that I, at a high level, present some of the core standards for each type of residency program. So this is what our accreditation standards publication looks like for entry to practice. The first standard focuses on program delivery. Within each standard, within each standard, there is a series of key elements and also supporting documentation that is required. In Standard 1, you'll see that the healthcare organization must work in partnership with the academic nursing programs. Thank you. And they must work in this partnership to offer and implement the entry to practice nurse residency program in a manner that ensures a successful transition from education to the practice environment for these residents. The healthcare organization and the academic partner provide qualified program educators, such as the healthcare organization educators, academic faculty, subject matter experts, and resident facilitators to enable the entry to practice nurse residency program to achieve its mission goals and expected outcomes. Standard 2, and by the way, each of these 4 standards has many key elements within it that I will not have time to cover. I just wanted to introduce the broader concepts today, given the time parameters. Standard 2, the focus is again on program quality. In this case, it's the institutional commitment and resources to support the entry to practice program. Again, the partners need to demonstrate ongoing commitment and support for the program. They need to demonstrate a commitment to educational progression for those residents not prepared with a baccalaureate or graduate degree in nursing. So this is interesting because if the resident is coming from an associate degree program, they're a registered nurse without a BSN preparation, but they have ADN preparation, there is a requirement that the healthcare organization supports those associate degree prepared nurses to earn their bachelor's program, earn the bachelor's degree in a timely manner. Fiscal resources, physical resources, program educators, and teaching learning support services are examined by the CCNE team when reviewing these programs. And we evaluate the programs to ensure that they are able to implement their own mission, goals, and expected outcomes. There must be a fiscal commitment from the healthcare organization to enable residents to fully participate in the program. Standard 3, the focus is on program quality, but this time curriculum. The curriculum has many areas of focus identified here: person-centered care, quality and safety, informatics and healthcare technologies, evidence-based practice and quality improvement, and personal, professional, and leadership development are all part of the required curriculum for these entry to practice nurse residency programs. There is more detail here that you can read, and of course, I do suggest that you look at the full standards with the elaborative language if you are interested in more details about the curricular requirements for these residencies. Okay. And the fourth and final standard now shifts, as you can see, from program quality, which is the focus of standards 1, 2, and 3, to program effectiveness. So here, CCNE is looking at the assessment and achievement of the residency program outcomes. And we want to see that the program is effective in fulfilling its mission and goals as evidenced by achieving its expected program outcomes. We certainly are looking at evaluation data and analyzing that to see if the program is meeting its own mission and identified outcomes. And we also, very important for the CCNE process, whether we are accrediting education programs in universities or residency programs in healthcare organizations, we want to see the data and that the faculty, in this case the partner, the healthcare organization, that they are using the data they're collecting to foster ongoing program improvement. As you all know, collecting the data isn't necessarily the most difficult part. It's knowing what to do with the data, to analyze the data, to drive improvements and improve the residency's overall ability to meet the mission. Therefore, if the residents are improving and their outcomes are improving, the patient experience also should be improving. So now let's shift to nurse practitioner. Once again, there are two core publications driving the experience for CCNE, the standards for accreditation, and the procedures for accreditation. These documents, very similar to the entry to practice, but the content is quite different. For an entry to practice residency that is focused on the new nurse is very different than the expectations for a residency program that is focused on preparing nurse practitioners for the workforce. And the cover of our standards publication is here. And again, we're looking at 4 standards, okay? And here we're looking to see the congruence of the mission, goals, and expected program outcomes between the sponsoring organization and that they're consistent with the nurse practitioner's defined scope of practice. We also want to see support through the academic practice partnership. We look at qualifications of the educators who are involved in the learning sessions and the courses that are taught. And we also want to see that the program is fostering the achievement of the mission goals and expected program outcomes. With Standard 2, you're going to recognize similar language with the focus being on the NP level and supporting the residents through resource commitments and fiscal dedication and commitment. We want to see that there is a sufficient number of program educators and mentors to foster achievement of the mission. And we want to see that that fiscal commitment enables the participants to fully engage in the program. If the nurse practitioners are not given time to attend learning sessions over the course of their residency, then the sponsoring institution has not given appropriate fiscal support for those nurse practitioners to have protected time to fully immerse themselves in the residency program beyond doing the job that they have been hired to do as a nurse practitioner. There are details about that within Standard 2 and the key elements. The curriculum here builds upon the participants' graduate NP education, whether prepared at the master's level or the doctoral level. We want the program to build on what they have already learned as part of a formal graduate nursing education program. And it's designed to enhance proficiency in competencies. So they've already attained competencies because they are a graduate of an accredited nurse practitioner program. And they have already successfully passed their certification exam, so they have already been deemed competent to practice. So I want to be very cautious when I use this term here, that the program is designed to enhance or build upon proficiency. This is not a substitute for the NPs having a quality graduate level education, which they need before they enter the residency program. So those competencies that we're focusing on building upon are within 8 domains of competence for the health professions. There are footnotes that are missing here, which is why you see the numbers 2 and 3. For this purpose, the domains are person-centered care, knowledge for advanced nursing practice, practice-based learning and improvement, interpersonal and communication skills, professionalism, systems-based practice, interprofessional partnership, and personal, professional, and leadership development. The curricular content builds upon common advanced practice competencies and enhances the NP-specific knowledge and skills in practice in the designated population or specialty area. And finally, Standard 4 for the NP, fellowships and residencies, is the outcomes, assessment and achievement of program outcomes, fulfilling its mission and goals as evidenced by achieving outcomes, looking at the data, looking at the actual levels of achievement, comparing those to the expected levels of achievement, and then, of course, making improvements to the program. So I'd like to offer a few concluding remarks, just reflecting on our time in accrediting in this space for the past 19 years or so. One of the things I'd like to mention, and you've heard me state this already, but the importance of academic practice partnerships for all types of nurse residency and fellowship programs has been very important. We have heard this from healthcare organizations, the employers, the academic partners feel it's very important. Healthcare organizations have a choice of accreditor. CCNE is not the only accreditor accrediting in this area, but we are the only accreditor requiring an academic practice partnership. So there are other accreditors who accredit nurse residency programs, and some of them do it only virtually through a paper review without ever conducting an in-person site visit, and some do not require the partnership. We have heard that there is great value in our process, and it is viewed as the prestigious premier accreditation process because we require the self-study, the on-site evaluation, and the academic practice partnership. And these things together are viewed as a more comprehensive, rigorous way to review and accredit these programs. I'd also like to note the significance of CCNE's partnership with the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. We call this the VA. The VA is part of the U.S. federal government and is the largest healthcare provider in the United States. It is a key partner for CCNE, and there are 2 specific offices within the VA that CCNE works closely with. Although we are not funded by the VA, we are not sponsored by the VA, but the VA has made it very clear to their the VA has made it very clear to their VA sites that they prefer the CCNE accreditation model because of the rigor with our process. We work with the Office of Academic Affiliations, which is called OAA, Office of Academic Affiliations, and that office is responsible for the academic development of practitioners to care for veterans. We also work closely with the Office of Nursing Services, ONS, which is responsible for operating daily nursing care for patients in VA hospitals and clinics. Both of these offices support residency programs, and CCNE works with the OAA and the ONS staff leaders to help ensure that the VA programs throughout the United States are appropriately resourced and able to pursue accreditation to be ready to experience that process. So we benefit greatly by the work that we do to build relationships and collaborate with the VA. It is a very important partnership for us. And that is certainly something in Korea. If you are considering accrediting healthcare organizations, residency or fellowship programs, you want to build those strong partnerships. We invite the VA to send us comments when we revise the standards, and we take their comments very seriously. The third item is really the importance for an accreditor that changes their scope of accreditation to make sure that you're adapting as an accrediting body. We have 13 members of our Board of Commissioners, including 3 deans, 3 faculty, 3 practicing nurses, 2 employers, and 2 public members who are not from the nursing profession. And when we started accrediting residency programs, we thought, we may need to change some of the qualifications for the candidates running for election for our board to ensure that the employer representatives on our board have expertise in overseeing residency programs. And so that was a change that we made to ensure that we have some people with expertise on our board when we expanded our scope into this area. We also have seen growth, and the staff feel the growth in numbers and the volume of our work, as do our committee and board members. There are many more programs now and materials that need to be reviewed in advance of a board meeting. We didn't have a qualified pool of evaluators to review residency programs. All of our evaluators had expertise in higher education and practice related to higher education programs. So when we accredited the residency programs, we needed to train a whole new group of experts who are in the healthcare organizations, who are residency coordinators, vice presidents for patient services, chief nursing officers, and others who have experience leading residency programs in various hospitals and healthcare organizations across the country. And that takes resources to do that well. And so we have certainly made an investment of time and resources to accomplish that. There are implications on workload when an accreditor expands its scope in this kind of way. That is something that is certainly important to be mindful of. And in general, how our systems are impacted. We, like Cabone, we had an outdated database, and we have worked to update it, revise it over time. Technology changes. There wasn't the cloud-based, 25 years ago. Now things are in the cloud, and we used to use Access. And so changing all of that has also been important to keep pace with technology. And so systems need to change for the accrediting body as well. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. And whenever it's appropriate, we're happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
네, 제니퍼 버틀랜드 박사님 발표 잘 들었습니다. 감사합니다. 저희가 사진 촬영을 먼저 한 다음에 다음 섹션으로 가도록 하겠습니다. 참석자 여러분들은 모두 앞으로 나와주시기 바랍니다. 사진 촬영을 위해서. 네, 다음으로 두 번째 발표입니다. CCNE의 노리 에스칼러 박사님께서 간호학 교수 관련 주요 이슈 및 학술, 현장, 협력 개요를 주제로 발표해 주시겠습니다. 노리 에스칼러 의장님께서는 현재 뉴욕 주립대학 중에 하나인 다운스테이트 건강과학대학교 간호대학 학장으로 재직 중이신 간호교육 및 성과 분야의 전문가십니다. 현재 CCNE 이사회의 의장으로서 미국 간호교육의 국가적 기준과 교육 성과 체계를 설계하는 데 핵심적인 역할을 수행하고 있습니다. 주제 발표 시간 40분이고요. 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
Well, hello, colleagues, and I'd like to thank you for sharing part of your afternoon with us today. It has been truly an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank the K&A leadership and Cabone leadership for inviting us to present in your beautiful country. I'm Lori Escalera. I'm chair of the CCNE Board of Commissioners. I'm also dean and professor at SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University in New York City. And I've worked in a variety of academic and clinical positions over the course of my career. I won't tell you how long it's been, but it's been a long, long time. And I have to say that this has been one of the highlights of my professional career. So I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. It's truly an honor to be here. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this session will have two parts. First, I will talk about important issues, and these issues related to nursing faculty matters are concerns not only in the United States, but they're concerns in Korea, and I would say that these are concerns around the world. And secondly, I will give you an overview of academic practice partnership, the importance of these partnerships, and the American Association of Colleges of Nursing just published a new guidebook that I will leave with you and to enjoy. Thank you. So our objectives for today's presentation are to explore matters of importance to nursing faculty and to evaluate academic practice partnerships. And we in the United States consider academic practice partnerships to be the future of nursing. So we will talk about that and the various roles, and we'll talk about the guidebook in the second part of this presentation. So now we're going to talk about nursing faculty matters. We will look at the various topics and classifications of faculty and funding and composition, ratios, clinical competence, and technology integration. Okay, so let's start with faculty classifications and funding. I want to share something very important with all of you, and that is that CCNE does not prescribe faculty titles. CCNE doesn't prescribe rank or tenure qualifications. This means that CCNE doesn't tell a school what to do with regard to faculty positions or how to structure things like promotion and tenure. CCNE standards also do not require a certain number or percentage of full-time or part-time faculty. This is up to the program to decide how they structure their faculty. CCNE does not assess nursing programs based on faculty salaries during the accreditation visit. And CCNE does not collect or compare data on faculty salaries across all its institutions. However, and this may be particularly useful for you, CCNE's parent organization, the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, or better known as AACN, does collect these data about faculty salaries, composition of faculty, and publishes a book once a year regarding faculty salary and faculty composition. I love to get my copy because a lot of deans use this book to support, use the data in the book to support increases for faculty if faculty are complaining that they're not, making as much money and salary as competitor institutions in the neighboring areas. Now, there's something for us to think about here. And what are the major types of nursing faculty in the United States? For example, full-time, part-time, adjunct, clinical faculty. And I can answer this question by saying that in the United States, we see differences across institutions. We see it varies by institution to institution. Each institution defines these categories somewhat differently, so there is no single national definition. And I think, Jen, you put this booklet up before. This is the cover of the book that AACN publishes each year on faculty salaries. So we're going to continue talking about faculty classifications and funding. So how are faculty salaries funded? It typically comes from 5 sources, and the first source is state government funding. The second source is federal government funding. The third is revenue generated by tuition dollars, so money that the university collects from tuition and other fees. Endowments, meaning donated funds that generate ongoing income. And other sources, for example, grants, whether they're private or foundation grants, or clinical revenue. And some institutions in the United States have nurse-managed practice plans where nurses run and manage clinics, and the revenue generated from their work helps to support faculty salaries. So the take-home message here is that these, the composition of faculty and faculty salaries vary from institution to institution. Public universities rely more on state funding, and private universities rely more heavily on endowments. Now, let's talk about faculty composition and ratios. Again, I want to be clear that CCNE does not stipulate, meaning does not require, a specific faculty composition or specific categories of faculty, whether full-time, part-time, adjunct, tenured, or non-tenured. Instead, the program itself is responsible for demonstrating three things about the faculty. And I will read this directly now from the CCNE standards, and that is key element 2F, that faculty must be sufficient in number to accomplish the mission goals and expected program outcomes. Faculty must be academically prepared for the areas in which they teach. Faculty must be experientially prepared, meaning that they have real practice experience for the areas in which they teach. However, there is an important nuance here, and some U.S. state governments, through their state boards of nursing, do specify faculty composition requirements in their own regulations. For example, I live and work in New York State, and our New York State board dictates that we have a 1-to-10 ratio for undergraduate baccalaureate students. I mean, you could have 1-to-8 or 1-to-7, but if you have 1-to-11, you'll get in trouble. What are the official regulations and rationale regarding faculty compositions and numbers? I would point out that in the U.S. system, this is basically a layered answer. CCNE sets broad, principled expectations. State boards of nursing add many more specific numeric rules. So the official answer to the question, the official regulation really depends on which state and which board of nursing a program is operating under. All right, so let's go a little deeper into the faculty to student ratios. Here is an important fact. There is no common single standard for faculty to student ratios in the United States, not across colleges and universities, not even across every nursing program. So let's take a look at some examples of how these ratios can vary. CCNE's philosophy is this, and this is the substance. It's the substance of the activities, the experiences, and intersections matter more than the ratio number itself. A lower number is not automatically better. It is the quality, if the quality of the supervision is weak. So most people think that when the ratio is lower, the quality is better. But that is not necessarily the case. That being said, CCNE does give one specific number, and that is for nurse practitioner tracks. The recommended faculty to student ratio for indirect faculty supervision is 1-to-8. And indirect clinical supervision includes clinical coordination, arrangements with preceptors and the clinical agencies and partners, and monitoring a student's progress. So basically, what you can see based on what I shared is that there is no one standard ratio across all of the U.S. nursing education programs, except for the one specific guidance for NP-related supervision. Okay, so the ratios are determined by the program and are evaluated by the CCNE team when they read the self-study and conduct the comprehensive on-site visit. CCNE requires programs to define workloads, and when preparing for a site visit, faculty workloads are part of what is placed in the virtual resource room. Now, an interesting comparative point is that some of the U.S. accreditors, not CCNE, but some of the other accrediting bodies, are more prescriptive than CCNE about faculty to student ratios. And there are really some pros and cons to having more prescription. So more prescription, meaning more, specific fixed rules, creates predictability and creates consistency. It can also protect quality in programs with weaker internal oversight. Less prescription, like CCNE's approach, allows programs to be innovative, to design ratios that fit their own context, their own student population, and their own clinical environments. But it requires that the program takes more responsibility for proving that these ratios actually work. I share this because I know that from my reading and my homework for the presentation is that Cabon's approach involves more specific prescriptive ratios. So this contrast may be a useful context, if you will, as we continue with today's presentation. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about maintaining clinical competence. And one of the questions we were asked in preparing our presentation is, what strategies are used to ensure full-time nursing faculty continuously update their clinical skills and stay current with advancing clinical practice? Okay, now, CCNE requires that faculty teaching clinical and master's and DNP programs hold a graduate degree. For baccalaureate programs, there is more flexibility. Any clinical faculty who does not hold a graduate degree must provide evidence of clinical competence. For example, significant experience in clinical activities, advanced certifications. It's up to the program to provide such evidence. And these faculty have to be prepared in the clinical area in which they are teaching. Many programs in the U.S. provide protected time for faculty to stay current. And I know I had mentioned this morning that what I have done, because salaries in clinical practice are higher than in academia, so it's very challenging for us to hire qualified faculty. So, so what I do is, I hire faculty and advise them to maintain their clinical practice. And we used to afford faculty 1 day a week for their scholarship. But I'm finding now over the last several years, we have allowed faculty to practice in their clinical areas more than 1 day a week to increase, their salaries. And it's working out really, really well for us. However, we do expect that they meet all the expectations of faculty that we outline depending on their rank, depending on position, and the faculty are evaluated based on whether or not they meet the faculty expectations for their rank and position. So, let me read the CCNE requirement carefully. Faculty teaching clinical are experienced in and maintain clinical expertise in the relevant clinical area. Clinical experience may be maintained through clinical practice or other means. Faculty teaching in advanced practice clinical courses meet certification and practice requirements as specified by the relevant regulatory and specialty bodies. This is part of key element 2F. And note the phrase clinical practice or other means. This allows programs, allows institutions flexibility in how their faculty maintain their clinical competence. And let's explore now how CCNE assesses during accreditation and some strategies that U.S. institutions use. So, as I mentioned before, maintaining a part-time clinical practice alongside teaching, continuing periodic clinical refresher rotations, holding joint appointments with a hospital, and maintaining active national certification that requires ongoing continuing education. And we provide ongoing clinical education to our faculty of all ranks. And the expectation is that faculty will make sure they're there and make sure they get the continuing development, professional development that they need to excel in their jobs. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about integration of technological trends. How does CCNE advise or recommend institutions to integrate rapid advancements in science, in medical technology, such as artificial intelligence, AI, into their curriculum revisions? Now, CCNE considers AI to be a technological tool. CCNE does not mention AI specifically in our standards by name, so it's up to the program to determine how they incorporate AI into their practices, either by policy, whether they allow students to use artificial intelligence or not, which is a very hot topic right now in the United States. But instead, CCNE requires that all nursing programs incorporate the 10 domains, the 8 concepts, and the 45 competencies from the AACN Essentials document that was just recently updated. And I've included the URL for you if you would like to refer to that, that document. So CCNE does not issue specific AI guidance. Instead, CCNE expects each program to interpret the existing informatics and technology competencies within the essentials and apply them to the current tools, including AI. And this is just basically an FYI. In the United States now, we're seeing a lot of programs develop special tracks. For example, Florida State University has launched a master's program focused on artificial intelligence in healthcare. And that university also sponsors an artificial intelligence innovation consortium that is becoming very, very popular. And in addition to that, AACN now has launched a new AI seminar series, and this series is designed to give nursing educators and academic leaders the foundational knowledge they need to prepare students for AI-enabled healthcare environments. And I've included the website for the series here for your reference as well. And finally, I'd like to share something from my own work with CCNE, and that is that the CCNE Board of Commissioners has identified AI as a topic of interest. And we've begun to explore AI during professional development sessions at the CCNE Board's annual retreat. Okay, so now we're going to move to the second half of today's program, and that is going to be about academic practice partnership and the expectations of academic institution. And what I'll do is give some possible Korean examples to put the AACN playbook at work, okay? So, why partnerships are non-negotiable? So, academic institutions are co-responsible for building a competent and sustainable nursing workforce. Let me walk through the 3 pillars upon which the playbook rests. First has to do with competency-based education. And what AACN is saying is that curricula must align with real-world clinical competence, moving beyond task-based training. The second pillar has to do with workforce sustainability. Academic institution and their clinical partners should co-design learning environments that reduce staff turnover and help new nurses become ready faster. And third, the advancement of nursing science. These partnership structures should integrate research and evidence, not just clinical training. Okay, And here is the one core, the heart of the playbook premise. Partnerships are prerequisites, not these optional add-ons, and we need this for sustainability. Nursing education must be competency-based, technologically capable, and reflective of the populations it serves. Now let me speak a bit about the South Korean context. So we all know that Korean nursing education is regulated by Kabon. Now, Korean programs can apply this playbook shared vision by formulating MOUs, or memoranda of understanding, with teaching hospitals, with the community health centers. But the key mindset is that clinical placement access is a strategic priority, not merely an administrative task. And it has been an administrative task for so long, and it has not been a strategic priority. So this is how we're moving now in the United States. We're making, and we need to make this a priority because it's very challenging to find high-quality clinical placements. Is that a problem here in Korea as well? Yeah, it's becoming more and more difficult. So what we're trying to do is develop these partnerships, this collaboration, with the community, with teaching hospitals. Recently, we just had at my institution had a ribbon cutting ceremony, when we cut the ribbon because we've opened something new. And we opened 2 dedicated education units. And I was really so proud. And what I observed was something that I hadn't really seen in a long time. And that was the nurses on the unit were so excited about working with the students. And we gave them a few little perks. We bought them special vests and special, pens, and we did it very symbolically. It is working out so well. The clinical faculty are happy because they are collaborating now with the nurses in a way that they hadn't. Sometimes you assign, a clinical faculty to a clinical unit with students, and it changes every semester. Well, these dedicated education units, as long as I'm dean of this university, will be strong and grow even stronger. And what we do for the nurses who work in the dedicated education units, we provide them with tuition assistance, we provide them with continuing education opportunities, and they're becoming more and more interested in academic nursing. And this makes me so happy because it is really challenging, especially in the New York City area, to hire qualified faculty because of the competition in our area. There are a lot of colleges and universities of nursing, and we kind of vie for faculty and poach, which is terrible, from one university to the other. And if one university is paying a little bit more, what can I do to incentivize faculty to come to my institution? So we're doing a lot of creative things. Let's see. Okay, now also in this academic playbook, is an expectations for academic institutions. And the first expectation here is to embed human-centered care and community engagement. And they talk about these three roles: the roles of awakeners, the role of connectors, the role of upholders. So the role of awakeners is to create these formal growth pathways, embed professional development, as I mentioned before, into daily clinical operations, rather than treating it as one thing you do every now and again. The connectors bridge the gap between academic, clinical, and community partners, especially for underserved or vulnerable populations. The upholders design systems that value faculty, staff, and learners as whole persons and align academic workloads with clinical quality goals. Now, a South Korean implementation example could be to imagine a nursing program partnering with a community health center in an underserved urban district of Seoul. Senior students could rotate through the center, conduct health screenings for elderly residents, age 65 and older, even though I don't consider 65 and older elderly, a rapidly and growing demographic in South Korea. And a leadership immersion. In this model, faculty act as connector leaders. They coordinate with the local public health office. They can align learning objectives with national health priorities, such as, for example, dementia care or chronic disease management. And students can earn requested clinical hours while generating data that can be used for public health policy. Okay, expectation 2, lead competency-based education and workforce readiness. Academic institution must co-design clinical education that is relevant, that is reciprocal, and practice-aligned. And let me walk you through one specific example. So number one, I think what we can do here is co-develop curricula with practice partners to reflect the realities in clinical care. 2, you can establish the dedicated education units, as I described before, but do that jointly with your clinical partners. 3, provide faculty oversight and retain faculty of record responsibilities, meaning that the university faculty members remains formally accountable for the academic content. And that's important. 4, invest in onboarding, mentorship, and role clarity for clinical instructors. And 5, secure and manage shared funding agreements. And that involves some negotiation, but it's not impossible. 6, track competency outcomes and share data transparently with practice partnerships. Now, for a Korean context example would be a nursing school in South Korea signs an MOU with a tertiary hospital to create the DEU unit, say an internal medical unit, they hire 4 clinical nurses, experienced clinical nurses, that are jointly appointed with the university, and they could receive a pay differential for teaching shifts while remaining employees of the clinical agency. The faculty role, a university faculty member serves as the clinical coordinator of the program, and this person visits frequently, mentors the instructors, and this is what we did at my institution, and maintains all the grading and all of the academic responsibility. Costs are split between the two institutions. The university pays for approximately 20 hours per week, and the hospital covers the remaining costs. The goal here is to reduce the traditional 6 to 12-month hospital orientation period by improving clinical readiness at the point of graduation. This directly addresses Korea's documented challenge with new nurse attrition, meaning nurses leaving the profession early in their careers. And I'll go quickly now through expectations 3 and 5 that deal with innovation, nursing science, and sustaining the workforce. Leading innovation. You can co-develop simulation laboratories and virtual care training with your practice sites. You can pilot new care delivery models, for example, telehealth or community-based care. Share infrastructure and technology to avoid duplication between the academic institution and the clinical agency. You can advance nursing science, and that's what we all do as nursing faculty, by generating and sharing experience from partnership-based research, include practice partners as co-investigators. Hospital personnel will love you. Align research questions with workforce and pertinent outcome priorities. And in terms of sustaining the workforce, expand enrollment by leveraging practice-based teaching capacity. Create tuition support pipelines, say for RN to MSN and RN to DNP advancement. Reduce faculty workload through shared clinical instruction models. So my key takeaway here is that academic institutions must move from being passive to becoming active co-architects of the nursing workforce pipeline. This is a shift in mindset for us, as much as it is a shift in practice. So that's my presentation for the afternoon, and I will turn it over now to Dr. Park. Thank you. Thank you.
네, 준비된 발표는 저희가 이제 모두 끝났습니다. 아마 이제 질의가 많으실 것 같은데요. 좌석에 앉으셔서 여러분들이 질의응답 시간을 진행하고자 합니다. 그래서 여러분들이 질문을 하실 때는 마이크를 온 해주시고요. 질문이 끝나시면은 마이크를 오프해 주시면 되실 것 같습니다. 혹시 질문 있으시면 질문 시작 전에 소속과 성명을 말씀해 주시면 감사드릴 것 같습니다. 저희 연자분들이 통역기를 들으신 이후에 다시 질문해 주시면 될 것 같습니다. 혹시 질문 있으신가요? 교수님들께서 많이 참여하셨기 때문에 저희 학교와 임상 현장과 어떻게 파트너십에 대해서 또 많이 말씀해 주셨고, 임상 교수 이런 부분이라든지 아니면 MP 프로그램 저희 지금 안 하고 있지만 시도하려고 하기 때문에 그런 레지던시 프로그램 이런 것들에 대해서 말씀해 주셨기 때문에, 아니면 뭐 DU 이런 것들도 저희 교육 정책에서는 하려고 애쓰고 있는 지금 상황이기 때문에 여러분들께서 자유롭게 질문해 주시면 되실 것 같습니다. 질문 있으신 분?
Thank you very much for your insightful talks today. So I have a question about MP program and residency program. I'm going to continue on my question in Korean for clear communication. 안녕하세요. 저는 경희대학교 간호과학대학의 간호대학원 역할을 맡고 있는 임여진이라고 합니다. 사실은 이제 오늘 이 세션을 쭉 들으면서 아직 저희가 이제 NP 프로그램이 역사가 거의 20년 가까이 되는데, 이 APRN 프로그램이 한국 간호교육제도에서 정착은 어느 정도 되었다고 생각이 되는데, NP 교육을 마친 후에 클리닉에 가가지고 실제로 NP 역할을 하는 졸업생들이 아직은 많이 없기 때문에, 왜냐하면 현장 실무 상황이 좀 NP가 아직 정착되기에는 한국은, 그러니까 제가 짧은 시식으로 보기에는 아직은 완전하지 않기 때문에, 사실은 이 어드밴스드 프랙티스가 제대로 좀 정착이 되어야지 학부와 이제 그레주에이트 레벨의 어떤 교육 연계라든지 실무의 업그레이드 이런 것들이 좀 가능해질 거라고 생각이 됩니다. 그런데 이제 NP 프로그램의 역사가 오래됐음에도 불구하고 아까 말씀드린 것처럼 현장에서 NP 교육을 전담할 수 있는 전문적인 NP, 믿고 맡길 수 있을 만한 이제 실습지도 겸직 교수, 실습 사이트의 교수들이 아직 충분히 확보되지 않았기 때문에 미국에서도 오랫동안의 이제 NP 역사, 교육의 역사가 있으시면서 초반에는 좀 실제로 교육에 참여하는 교수들의 자격 요건을 좀 이렇게 넓게 확장하셨던 걸로 알고 있는데, 지금 이 시점에 사실은 한국 간호교육에서 이제 NP 교육을 더 잘 세팅하고 하려면 어떤 옵션이 필요한지 교수님들의 좀 의견을 좀 듣고 싶고요. 실제로 이제 CCNE에서 실제로 이제 평가를 할 때, MP 프로그램 평가를 할 때 아까 여러 가지 이제 평가 기준에 대한 얘기는 해주셨는데, 어떤 요소를 가장 중요하게 생각하는 기준이신지 그게 좀 궁금합니다.
Certainly, you have to start somewhere. I know that nurse practitioners were not educated at the graduate level for many years in the United States. And the system evolved, maybe more slowly than some would have liked, but it does evolve. It takes years sometimes for that evolution to occur so that you can build your own pipeline at a higher level. And certainly we saw that in NP education in the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s when it became very commonplace and the norm for nurse practitioners to be prepared at the master's level. And that for a couple decades was the norm in the United States. And then change happens again. The DNP is established. And now we are preparing NPs at two different levels, master's and DNP. Excuse me. And there is always tension, a tug and pull, if you will, because you have a population of individuals who have been prepared as it has been in the past, and they can sometimes feel threatened or that they are in jeopardy for losing their status, their positions. And I think a lot of work was done in the United States to ensure that people who had been prepared at the level that was the standard level in the past would not lose their jobs. They would be secure in their jobs. But as a profession, it's still the right thing to do to move forward, to advance the profession. And we also have that occurring in a backdrop where there are other health professions moving toward the doctorate as well. So you have the politics involved of not wanting nursing to be left behind when you have pharmacy that used to be a baccalaureate and now is a PharmD, Doctor of Pharmacy, and occupational therapy, now an OTD, and I can go on, nurse anesthesia. There are many professions that have moved to advance from the associate degree to the baccalaureate, or the baccalaureate to the master's, or even the doctorate, as has been the case with CCNE, the nursing profession. You know, one of the challenges when the DNP was established and we began accrediting these programs, I remember when the first 4 DNP programs were established, and we didn't have anybody with a DNP credential to send on the team to evaluate the new DNP. But that didn't stop us, because you have to start somewhere, and you know that you have to build the pipeline. And eventually that number of 4 expanded to 10, to 50, to 100, to now, you know, almost 400 DNP programs. So certainly we now have individuals in our group of on-site evaluators who are DNP prepared. But as many of you know, being prepared and trained as an on-site evaluator, as a peer reviewer for accreditation, is much more complex than simply the degree that you hold. We can't summarize the expertise and abilities of an individual to serve in a very capable way as a peer reviewer simply because they hold a PhD or a DNP. There are lots of other skills and attitudes and strong writing skills, collaborative skills, interviewing programs, program constituents that are very important. So I guess my beginning of my answer is, don't be discouraged because it's new. Don't let that stop you from moving forward. The second point I would make is that I think Korea has a great advantage because you do have 20 years of experience now with NP programs. And there may be a desire and reasons to begin to standardize and set national expectations and to hold programs accountable. But certainly you have produced many nurse practitioners in the past 20 years and employers of these individuals who could be very helpful partners to you as you begin the work to consider what the national expectations should be. I think there was more to your question, but I also want to give Dr. Escalera a chance to respond.
Yes. We're on now? Yes. You know, I think it's a perfect opportunity for the KNA in collaboration with Cabone to take on full force ahead. And I think that, where you start with this is by gathering the data. There's lots of data on nurse practitioners and what they bring to quality patient care, especially in primary care. You have to get all of your nursing organizations and your clinical partners on board. And I think that's key, because where there's power in numbers, And for us in the U.S., it was a challenge because initially our medical counterparts were resistant to the NP movement for fear that we were going to take over primary care. And now what we're seeing is that all of the physicians look to the nurse practitioners to provide the primary care as medicine, as physicians, medical students are specializing and not going into primary care. The salaries of physicians in primary care are much lower than they are in the specialty areas. But I would gather the data, do a review of the literature, look at what nurse practitioners bring to the table, and build your case. And I think that's important.
A couple other thoughts. It's much easier to do this when the nation only has one accreditor for nursing and one certifier. If there, I don't know how many you have, but we have many. And it complicates things because now there's competition among the accreditors. There's also competition among the certifiers. So it becomes simpler and cleaner to make decisions to drive the profession forward when there are, single institutions making the decisions. For example, when pharmacy moved to the PharmD, it was the accreditor that drove that decision to mandate the doctorate. With nurse anesthesia, a single accreditor and a single certifier work together to say CRNAs, certified nurse anesthetists, no longer can be prepared at the master's level. They must be prepared at the doctoral level. And they could either have a DNP or there's another credential, DNA, Doctor of Nurse Anesthesia, and I think there's a third, DNAP, Doctor of Nurse Anesthesia Practitioner. So, sometimes simple is better. That is one of the reasons why CCNE prescribes the degree title for the doctoral level, even though we don't do that at the baccalaureate and master's level. So for those who may have attended the morning session, you might recall that I shared some AACN data tables that said, most of the master's degree titles in the US are called MSN, Master of Science in Nursing with a capital N for nursing. But there's a good percentage of master's programs in nursing that are MS, Master of Science in Nursing, lowercase n for nursing. MSN versus MS, and then there are even MN, which is a Master's in Nursing, and there's MA, Master of Arts in Nursing. Talk about complicated. Why do we do this? Well, there's a lot of history and tradition in higher education systems in the United States, and so we didn't want to prescribe the titling. We want to be concerned about the quality. Are they preparing nurses to do to enter the workforce, and less concerned about, well, what title are you using? However, when we got involved in doctoral accreditation, our constituents said, please tell us which title to use, and we will all use that. And here's some context. At the time, there were a couple of universities, the very first 4 programs that were developed. One was at University of Washington, and I know one of you, Dr. Park, attended for your PhD, right? Well, the University of Washington decided we're going to give the clinical doctorate a different title. We're not going to call it DNP. I don't know if anyone knows what title they come up with, but it was ND, which also conflicts with Doctor of Naturopathy. So a nursing doctorate versus a Doctor of Naturopathy, confusion. And so Columbia University in New York said, we're going to come up with a new title. We're going to call it capital D, little r, capital N, capital P, DRNP. Why? Well, Columbia had a very successful DRPH program in public health. And they wanted, well, let's make it a DRNP to align with our DRPH, okay? And people started to get crazy. Do you understand? Does that translate? People started to panic for the profession. We're going to have chaos if we have an ND and an EDD and a DRNP. There's going to be confusion in healthcare, in titling. Patients and consumers won't know who is this professional. And so CCNE was called upon to standardize the title. It was a prescriptive move for us because we're not prescriptive in titling for the BSN and the MSN, but it was a good move because all of the programs are DNP and people now know what that means. So that was just a little sidebar. The other thing I wanted to share, you had asked about NP curriculum and setting the standards, I think. And I have there's a lot of detail.
I'm asking about what is the main criteria that you are evaluating for the nurse practitioner program?
Yeah.
Yes.
So our accreditation standards for baccalaureate and graduate nursing education program, it's one document, and it applies to all baccalaureate, master's, and DNP programs. Nurse practitioner programs are offered in master's and DNP programs. All programs, baccalaureate and graduate, including NP, must meet our standards for accreditation. But one thing that you've heard Dr. Escalier speak about is that CCNE requires the domains, concepts, and the 45 competencies from the AACN Essentials documents. Those are competency-based areas that apply at different levels based on whether it's an entry baccalaureate program, pre-licensure, or an advanced practice program. But, nurse practitioner programs need to show that they are offering a curriculum that demonstrates that those 45 competencies are being met. The other thing that you haven't heard from us yet, which is getting into more details, but I think it answers your question. We require all of our nursing programs and tracks to identify the additional professional nursing standards and guidelines that they are using. So they must demonstrate to us as the accreditor that they are using national standards relevant to the role and population. So for, do you want to give an example of NOMF competencies or another professional organization standards that a graduate NP program might select as the additional professional nursing standards and guidelines? NOMF is the National Organization of Nurse Practitioner Faculties, and they publish competencies for adult gerontological nurse practitioners, for family nurse practitioners, and others. And often our programs will select those.
Dr. Bertlin and Dr. Eskaler, because for the providing other people to have a Q&A, I'm just
Yes.
I totally understand your answer and I'm so appreciated.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
네, 혹시 또 다른 분들 질문하시죠.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Jae-hyun Kang, Professor and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, Seoul National University College of Nursing. I have two questions for Dean Eskaler. So you mentioned that the CCNE required clinical expertise may be maintained through clinical practice or other means. Could you please elaborate more about other means? What can we do for this clinical expertise maintenance? My second question is for you, is another part. We are considering the clinical faculty system for the education. So we are considering how we can make this a system for the clinical faculties. So could you please explain more about the USA clinical faculty system, how they are incorporated in the clinical practicum, and then how they are into your, CCNE standards? Thank you.
The clinical faculty question first. When we hire faculty, they're either placed on a clinical track or a tenure track. There are different expectations for both tracks. We have a workload guideline that we use when the associate deans formulate a faculty workload. If a faculty is on a clinical track, they do more clinical teaching than faculty on a tenure track, whose responsibility then would be research. So that's the question. I'm not sure I fully understood your first question.
You quoted from our standards, it said that they have to demonstrate that they have clinical expertise or other means, so like CEUs.
Yeah, so for clinical expertise, faculty could perhaps engage in professional development and other clinical-related activities. They could conduct clinical-based research. So we would look at that in the overall picture to make sure that they are maintaining their clinical competence by those types of activities.
Oh, thank you. So my question is for that part is I just want to know how many some kind of required hours of training or some kind of components of that other means clinical expertise maintenance. And then I know that kind of clinical faculty and tenure track faculty's difference, but I just wanted to know more about how you are making this clinical faculty component into your CCNE when you are accredited this kind of healthcare organization and academic partners.
We are required by CCNE to provide expectations for groups of faculty. So we list the expectations for our faculty at the various levels. And then we provide the evidence that faculty are meeting those expectations. If they're not meeting those expectations, when we analyze our data, then we have to fix the problem. And then what we will do is provide continuing education, say additional hours for clinical practice, provide opportunities for faculty to engage in scholarship, in service, and any of the other expectations that we have. One of the faculty outcomes at my university is every year clinical faculty must engage in 3 clinically related faculty development activities. And they then submit to the associate dean who evaluates them what those activities were, how those activities enhance their teaching and productivity. So there is a mechanism that's involved to make sure we maintain the clinical competence of our faculty. Of course, with tenure-track faculty, it's a little more difficult. I'm sure you experience the same thing, but we really hold a tight rope on our faculty, and if they're not engaging in the activities that they're required to, then we have a problem. But usually the faculty, if you motivate the faculty and get them involved in the activities and provide those kinds of activities, you usually don't have too many problems. So keep them motivated. I will always engage my faculty in my projects. And sometimes you have to, we have a term called voluntold in the U.S., where somebody doesn't volunteer, they're voluntold. And then they usually, take the advice and know perhaps they need to improve upon certain areas.
The other thing I will add to that in terms of the question about faculty meaning clinical expertise or by other means, CCNE's focus is going to be on what are they teaching. So there could be a faculty that is extremely clinically competent in practice and maybe has 10 years of experience, which is certainly a good number of years of experience, but it might not be very aligned with the area in which they're teaching. So it could be a series of continuing education courses or experiences or other things that Lori has mentioned that we would accept, but the focus on accreditation is, are they clinically competent in the area in which they're teaching? Because they could have extensive years of experience, but maybe they're asked to teach a different class, and they're not really considered an expert in that class. So that's something we look for as well. As usual, the onus, I hope that translates, the word onus. I'll use a different word. The responsibility is with the program to show us that the faculty are clinically competent. And we look at a wide array of evidence, including the CV or resume and other things. How are students performing in that and in a certain course? How are they performing in other outcomes indicators, course evaluations? There's a lot of other materials that can help an accreditor determine whether the faculty are clinically competent. Thank you.
안녕하세요. 이화여대 강사하고 있는 한민경입니다. 저는 2가지 질문이 있는데요. 네. 저희가 교육 인증 프로그램을 만들기 위해서 이제 정책적 파트너가 한국에서는 교육부하고 보건복지부일 것 같은데, 미국에서는 아까 보다 보니까 교육부나 보건복지부 얘기는 별로 안 나오고 보훈부가 굉장히 중요한 파트너라고 하고, 제가 듣기로는 스테이트 보드 오브 널싱이 좀 중요한 파트너인 것 같은 생각이 들었는데, 혹시 정책적 파트너가 CCNE에서는 어디에 되게 좀 중점을 두는지 좀 궁금하고요.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. So we don't have a Ministry of Education in the same way that other countries do. We do have a Department of Education that recognizes the national accreditors. So the U.S. Department of Education, based in Washington, D.C., has authority to recognize institutional accreditors as well as specialized accreditors. We have about 70 specialized accreditors in the United States. We have several in nursing, plus nurse midwifery, nurse anesthesia. We have, of course, public health, dentistry, medicine, radiologic technology, and then law, architecture, engineering, business, 75 maybe specialized accreditors. Not all of the accreditors are eligible to be recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. I would say maybe half are recognized. Why? There has to be a federal link to money in order for an accreditor to be eligible to be recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. There are what we call Title IV gatekeepers, and Title IV is student loans. So student assistance and loans, federal dollars being paid to support students getting their education. Title IV gatekeepers are going to be the institutional accreditors that those universities must have accreditation by the institutional accreditor that is recognized by the U.S. Department of Education in order for those students to qualify for federal loans. Okay? CCNE is not an institutional accreditor. We only review nursing programs that are housed within universities that have institutional accreditor. So it's the institutional accreditor that is the gatekeeper for Title IV money, which is student loans. So therefore, CCNE does not need to serve as the Title IV gatekeeper because it's done at the university level by the institutional accreditor. However, many of us in specialized accreditation have a different link to federal money that is unrelated to student loans. For example, they're called HEA funds, Higher Education Act funds. And so, for example, in the public health profession, there might be Centers for Disease Control, CDC, money that is awarded to faculty in schools of public health, and they write grants for federal money from the Centers for Disease Control, and they are eligible, the programs are eligible for those funds because the Council on Education for Public Health accreditor has Department of Education recognition. In our case, we are a gatekeeper for HEA funds as well. For example, Health and Human Services, HRSA, NINR funding go to faculty only if those faculty are in a CCNE accredited nursing program or a nursing program that is accredited by a nursing agency that has recognition by the Department of Education. CCNE is one of three, okay? And so there are various links that specialized accreditors have to federal funding that may not be student loans. and that makes us eligible for the U.S. Department recognition. So every 5 years, the accreditors with recognition by the U.S. Department of Education go through our own recognition process. And Dr. Escalera mentioned earlier that we had no compliance concerns the last time we went through that 5-year process. And in 3 weeks, we are submitting our petition again for the next 5-year process. You mentioned in your question about who sets policy. So I want to answer that because the U.S. Department of Education doesn't tell us what to do. We are not part of the government, but they do set recognition criteria. And let me give you 2 clear examples. The Department of Education criteria would say that as a recognized accreditor, you must have clear standards about faculty. That's all they say. It's up to us to work with our community of interest to determine how we want to write our standards and key elements, whether we want to be prescriptive or not, whether we want to require ratios or not, whether we want to allow part-time faculty, full-time faculty, what the qualifications are. So there's a lot of latitude for accreditors recognized by the Department of Education. As long as we address faculty and the standards are clear and consistently applied, we have a lot of latitude in setting the standard. Let me give you a second clear example. The Department of Education criteria for accrediting agencies say that accrediting agencies must address student achievement. And that includes program completion, nursing licensure, certification, and employment rates. The Department of Education does not say that our licensure certification rate has to be 80%. We get to decide that. So we write the details of what the rules are, what the expectations are, but we know that we have to have some standards in those areas. So those are just a couple of examples. We have a lot of leeway in terms of how to form the standards. The government is not telling us the details of what to put in our standards. The government is more telling us broad categories of things that must be included in our standards and policies, but it's up to each accreditor to write them in a way that's appropriate for our profession.
네, 혹시 또 다른 질문 있으실까요? 네, 이제 긴 시간 동안 오늘 오전 9시부터 네, 저희가 이루어졌는데요. 심포지움과 이어서 간담회도 이루어지고 또 내일 워크숍이 있으니까 혹시 못하신 질문은 네, 계속적으로 해주실 수 있으실 것 같습니다. 이것으로 실무 기반 교육 프로그램 인증 고찰 및 간호교육기관 역할을 주제로 K&A, CCNE 간담회를 모두 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사드리고 무더운 여름에 건강 유의하시기 바랍니다. 안녕히 가시기 바랍니다. 감사합니다.